Joining us now, Bob Bauer, professor of law at New York University and a former White House counsel in the Obama administration. Also with us, David K. Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who founded DCReport.org, a nonprofit news organization that covers the Trump administration. And also with us, Max Boot, senior fellow for national security studies at the Council on Foreign Relations and a former defense policy advisor for the Romney 2012 campaign. Bob Bauer, what's your reading of the possible legal liabilities coming out of that meeting?
One aspect of this meeting that may have been a little bit overlooked is that everybody who attended, the campaign manager, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., attended as agents on behalf of the campaign. The campaign as an organization comes within the circle of potential exposure here, and I think that's getting a little bit lost with the emphasis on Donald Trump Jr.'s potential exposure. Of course, each one of those individuals has to account for their actions and what led to them and what followed, but I think we ought to recognize that the Trump Presidential Committee here was involved in any solicitation or, for that matter, later any acceptance of value that they solicited in violation of the law, if in fact the evidence establishes that.
Bob, can I just stop you on the acceptance or solicitation of something of value? Has it been tested in campaign finance law that something of value could be information? Surely we know something of value is money. Something of value is, you know, you will cater our event for free. You'll give us hotel space for free, something like that. But this would be information. Has that been tested in FEC law?
There's no question that under the federal campaign finance law, information has market value. Consider, for example, domestic research firms in the political marketplace that are retained to produce opposition research, legitimate legal opposition research containing materials legally acquired. Campaigns pay a significant amount of money for that, and the supplying of that information without charge from any source is a thing of value, a contribution in kind under the law. Of course, if the source is a foreign national, much less a foreign government, it's an illegal contribution.
David K. Johnston, we have reports tonight that Donald Trump Jr. Got his original statement, the first public statement he made about this to the New York Times. He got that cleared with his father. It turns out now everything in that statement has been undone by Donald Trump Jr.'s own subsequent statements.
Well, we now can say with absolute certainty that all of the denials by the Trumps and their surrogates, including Kellyanne Conway and Ms. Huckabee Sanders and Sean Spicer, were not true. There is no question about this anymore. The Russians were involved. And I think the question people should be asking themselves is, what in the world would lead you to do anything when you get an email like the kind that Donald Jr. got, except to pick up the phone and call the FBI? That's your legal obligation. A foreign government is trying to influence us. You should pick up the phone. Look what Al Gore did when he was offered a George W. Bush, a domestic impropriety playbook during the campaign when they ran against each other. They called the FBI.
Max Boot, Jared Kushner is going to be asked under oath. He has said he will cooperate with the House Investigating Committee, so he'll be under oath with them, special prosecutor. He's going to be asked under oath, why did you not include this meeting, as well as others, on your security clearance form? And the only possible defense he can offer will be, I forgot.
Well, Lawrence, I mean, you're seeing this avalanche of lies come down on top of the Trump White House and quite possibly crush the Trump White House. I must say, I am just horrified and heartbroken by what's happened. I mean, just step back and think about this. This is the first time in American history when there are credible allegations that our president colluded with a hostile foreign power to win office and is quite possibly subject to blackmail by that same foreign power today while in office. And what's really heartbreaking to me, Lawrence, as somebody who spent my entire adult life as a Republican, is the fact that the Republican Party has become Donald Trump's enablers. They are complicit in what he is doing to our country, the shame that he is dragging us through. Even today, when we see that Donald Trump Jr. welcomed the help of the Russian government to win the election, Republicans are still making excuses for them. Most Republicans are still refusing to distance themselves from this White House. That is just shameful. It's embarrassing. I can't believe this is happening, that in my lifetime, the Republican Party has gone from Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, to Mr. Putin, tear down our political opponents.
Bob Bauer, I want to go to this legal point about, I know a lot of people think that if I just say I forgot, I don't recall, that they can't get me on that. I can give that answer under oath to anything. But if you're saying I don't recall, this Russian lawyer who comes in, not speaking a word of English, multiple emails arranging her arrival, saying, you know, she can't meet at this time because she's going to be she won't be off the plane yet. There's a lot of detail in these emails about arranging the meeting. Then she shows up with a translator. The credibility of someone simply forgetting a meeting like that, it seems to me, could be tested rather harshly under oath.
No question that it'll be tested. You're absolutely right about that. There are others who have no doubt recollections that bear on the question of what he might have been planning for this meeting. Other emails that we haven't seen that he exchanged with others about the meeting, both before and afterward. So there's a wealth of potential testimony and documentation that I think could ultimately reflect on whether or not he really forgot, or that's the best excuse that he can come up with at the present time. We just don't know. That's the one point about all of this that I would emphasize, which is whatever inquiry is going to take place here on the part of the congressional investigating committees or Bob Mueller is going to take a while. What we do know is that there's going to be plenty potentially to investigate, but where it leads and what else might be there that bears on the issue that you're interested in here, Jared Kushner's credibility, is at this point far from certain, and it could take a while.
David, having studied the Trumps, if you have over the years, writing books and studying their businesses, Donald Trump's loyalty, if it comes down to it, between his son-in-law and his son, Donald Jr.?
That will be a very tough choice, and I think the person who's going to face it is the person you brought up, Jared Kushner. Is he willing to risk becoming a felon and go to prison like his father did in order to protect his father-in-law? And the dynamics within the family are about to become very fascinating, because damaging as these emails are, this is not the end of the facts that we're going to come out and that we need to know.
Max Boot, what should Republicans be saying at this point, given the state of the information as it's emerged Monday and Tuesday of this week?
What they ought to be saying, Lawrence, is pretty obvious, that they are going to put patriotism to the country over their loyalty to the party. They're not going to move any legislation. They're not going to do anything, because they understand that the #1 party right now is to get to the bottom of this. They ought to be creating a joint committee in Congress or an independent bipartisan commission that would go hand in hand with Bob Mueller's special investigation. They should make clear that they do not support a president who looks the other way while his campaign is colluding with a hostile foreign power, or may very well be involved in that collusion himself. They should stop making excuses. They should come clean. They should realize that if they do not make a break with Donald Trump sooner rather than later, they will join him on the ash heap of history, that future generations will judge them very harshly if they are seen as enablers. And they have to have that moment that Republicans finally had in 1974 with Richard Nixon, when they said enough is enough. There are too many lies. We cannot swallow the lies anymore. That's it, Mr. President. We're not going to go to bat for you anymore. We have not reached that moment yet, but we need to reach that moment, because the evidence of wrongdoing on the part of the Trump campaign is just piling up, and you have to. It should be more than Republicans can bear, but I fear it is not.
Max Boot, David K. Johnston, and Bob Bauer, thank you all for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.